Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rebecca Luber. I'm the Director of Career and Business Engagements with the University of Minnesota Alumni Association. I just want to welcome you all to today's webinar, for the first 90 days of a new job virtually. We have a great presentation for you today. We also like to thank our members and donors of the Alumni Association for powering our alumni webinar series. To learn more, feel free to visit the information on your screen, and more information will be sent out afterwards. You may also be interested in a few other upcoming webinars entitled Networking Online with UMN Alumni and Banishing Burnout. You can learn more about that on our website, umnalumni.org/virtual. Today, if you're tuning in, you also have the option of listening in by phone by dialing 646-558-8658, and then the webinar ID, which is 945-0084-2699. Today, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, you may enter them into the Q&A box, and we'll reserve about 15 minutes towards the end to answer many of your questions. If we are getting a lot of questions, we'll try to answer some of those in the moment. All right. So without further ado, I'd like to begin introducing our presenter today, Haley Crawford. Haley Crawford has been a certified career coach and national career expert for 19 years. Her company, HaleyCrawford.com, and team of coaches have helped thousands of people worldwide identify and transition into their dream career, effectively navigate their job search, and enhance their performance at work. Haley is regularly featured as a career expert in the media, including US News, Forbes, the Wall Street Journal, CNN, and Fox Business News. Thank you and welcome, Haley.
Thank you. I really appreciate the introduction, Rebecca, and thanks everyone for being here today. We greatly appreciate it. Let me go ahead and share my screen so we can go ahead and get going. Bear with me 1 second. I want to make sure I choose the right one. Rebecca, can you see it okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, wonderful. So I'm excited to be here with you all today, especially during continuing crazy times. During the course of this summer, kind of earlier in the summer, midsummer, when we were talking about career topics and doing webinars, I was starting to move towards, how do we handle things post-COVID? And now, as we all know, it's a little bit like Groundhog Day and things are continuing. So this topic is, I would say, not just increasingly important, but it's still incredibly relevant, because even once everything kind of starts to subside and get better as it relates to COVID, the workforce and the way that we work is, I really feel that it has changed permanently. Like working virtually, at least to a certain extent, is here to stay, whether it's a hybrid half and half model or, a little bit more of one or the other. So how to navigate the first 90 days of your new job, especially how to handle that virtually, is critically important, because even if your brand new job, whenever you start it, whether it's now or a little bit later, if it's not completely virtually, odds are that it will be, at least to a certain extent. And when I think about this topic, I always kind of feel like a lot of the advice that we're going to give today mirrors and is very similar to the action steps that you would take if you were working solely in person. But we need to be a little bit more creative in the online environment. And that's what we're going to talk about today, how we kind of think outside the box and get more creative with getting to know people, getting your sea legs, etc. So we have actually been coaching and training for 22 years now. This year was our 22nd anniversary. I have degrees from Vanderbilt and the University of Illinois, and have been a certified career coach for 20 years now, and absolutely love what I do. We're excited to be here with you all today. We're trying to put out as much helpful information for people as we possibly can, because we know during these times there's just burnout. There's so much going on that we're trying to help people as much as we can. This is our website here. There's lots of great information there that you can check out later if you'd like. So let's go ahead and dive right in. So there have been lots of surveys that have been coming out, as I'm sure you all know and have probably seen, that there's a lot of people that would prefer to work remotely, or at least some of the time post pandemic, whenever all of this kind of settles down a little bit more. And just to be honest with you all, as you're reading this next slide and some of the statistics, we've had clients that fall into both camps. Some people are telling us, I am just dying to get back to the office. I don't like my job as much when I'm not able to interact with my coworkers and don't have that like social element, all the way to people who are saying, I only want to work remotely. And how do I deal with that in terms of, communicating that to my new boss or whatever it is. So working remotely, as we said, whether it's full-time or not, is here to stay, at least for the short term. And as we've all experienced during this past year plus, working remotely can be challenging. And one of the things that we have found is that it can be more challenging for some people than others. So please know, like one of the things we want you to think about when you're considering how to handle a new job, especially when you're starting up virtually, is you want to think about and kind of self-assess for you, what are the challenges that you have working remotely? Is it hard for you, for example, to create new processes and systems that you do better? For example, having the structure of an office and a meeting schedule provided to you, and that kind of automatic structure, if you will. Are you the type of person that would tend to overwork and therefore get burned out? So you need to be good about kind of setting your boundaries and parameters. And is it the case for you, for example, that, okay, I'm getting started working remotely here, but I've got kids or pets or whatever it is, and there's going to be some interruptions, and how do I manage my schedule and set up the right schedule for myself? So working remotely can be challenging, and the challenges are different for different people depending on their situation and their personality type too. So you want to think first about, okay, what are the possible challenges that I have faced so far working remotely, and going into this brand new job, how do I need to be really proactive about managing those upfront in advance? Here's our agenda for today and what we're going to talk about specifically. We'll talk about 7 common obstacles that people experience in the first 90 days of a new job, but even more so working remotely. How to get ahead and incorporate some of these elements that you want to put into place in the first 90 days as part of a longer term strategic career plan for yourself. And then finally, we'll talk about some tangible specific action steps. We want you to walk away with practical things that you all can implement immediately in the next couple of weeks here as you start your new jobs. And just by the way, too, if anyone would like, in addition to the copy of the recording that you will receive, if anyone would like a copy of our presentation, our PowerPoint slides, we are very happy to share those with you. No problem at all. Just email us at admin@halliecrawford.com and we will send those out to you. Because I don't know about you all, but I like to frantically write everything down, especially when things are virtual. And we don't want you to have to feel like you need to do that. So we want to do our first poll here just in a second. So Rebecca, sorry, on our next slide, we'll do it. I'll let you know. The first thing I want you all to think about, though, as you are starting to consider, okay, where are my roadblocks or challenges working remotely? These are some of the common obstacles we have found that people encounter in the first 90 days of a new job, but also working remotely, kind of combined together. So the most common obstacles we find are that people are a little bit nervous when they start a new job, understandably, and they feel like they have to have an impact right away to kind of prove their worth or value. And one of the most common obstacles, the first one on the slide here, is that people typically don't take enough time to observe and learn and kind of like sit back a little bit and get a sense of what the processes are and what other people have already tried before they start taking action. So that's number one. Number two, people tend to, in the first 90 days, they tend to try to a little bit too hard to be liked. And sometimes they may not set boundaries that they need to, or ask for what they need because they're concerned is coming across as incompetent, demanding, etc. Number three is another common obstacle is thinking your way of doing things is the only right way. And this goes back to it's a really good idea to observe and learn so that you know what your organization has tried before you dive in with ideas. Number four is assuming that you will figure things out really, really quickly. It takes at least 6 months to a year to really get your sea legs with a brand new job. So you need to be patient with yourself about learning the new processes and systems and just be persistent about it. Number five is thinking you have to work through your obstacles all alone, that you can't reach out or ask for help. And number 6 and 7 are not communicating enough with your peers, your supervisor, or even your direct reports about what your strengths are and what your preferred kind of work style is that helps you be more effective. And then finally, not enough people, they kind of dive into the tasks of their new job typically, and they don't take enough time to learn like about the people within the organization and who the key players are related to their role and what their personality type is and how they can best work with them. Okay, so we'd like to pull up this first poll here if we could, and we're curious what obstacles would apply to you the most as you start to think about this now, especially as it relates to being in a virtual environment, where are your kind of weak points or challenges typically? And we'll give you a moment to fill this one out. And we understand too that some of your obstacles may be different ones, and we'll work on addressing those as we talk today. And please feel free to ask questions as we go too. We'll give you another second to do that. And then Rebecca, when you're done or when everyone has voted, if you could just share the results, that would be fantastic, which I think is automatic, but just in case. Awesome. Yay. Okay, good. Thank you. I'm still getting used to all the different type of virtual meeting platforms that people use. All right. So if you take a look at this first poll, everyone, interestingly, this is not necessarily the one I would have guessed, but the trying too hard to be liked is 32%. And thinking you have to work through your obstacles alone is the second highest at 30%. Thank you all for sharing those. And part of why I wanted to bring these up first is because this is not just our first tip, that it's a really good idea to go in with your eyes wide open and think about, okay, what are my challenges so I can incorporate that into my 90-day plan. But also because once you start to, like, awareness is the first step. And once you're starting to become more aware of these things, you will naturally start to take action, to kind of work around them. And part of why we share this too is we want you all to know that you're not alone. This is a very odd situation for all of us because this working remotely virtually was thrust upon us. And not many people, if any, know exactly the perfect way to start a new job virtually. So you're not alone, you're in the right place today. So tip number 1 is to identify your top 2 obstacles. We would just start with 2 at the very beginning to keep it short and sweet and easy. Identify your 2 obstacles and develop a plan to address those in the first 90 days. And that's part of what we're going to be talking about today. We'll give you some advice and tips about how to handle those things. So tip number 2 is take some time, as we said earlier, to not just earn the respect of your team and your coworkers, etc., because I think this comes naturally and that would make sense, but make sure that you build in time during every part of your week and work day, daily of the first 90 days, to listen in on different meetings and listen to key players that are related to your role so that you can start to learn from them, like what the processes and systems are, what the culture of the organization is like, and how you can work with everyone more effectively. What is their different personality type, okay? And instead of just diving in right away, it's not that we don't want you to give or provide any ideas or suggestions at all in the first 90 days, far from that. But we want you to be proactive about asking for help and learning from other people who have been there for a long time, especially been at the organization or within that industry for a long time. So we don't want you to feel like you have to go it alone. And it would be a great idea to identify 1 or 2 people who seem or are very seasoned at your organization that you can kind of bring into the fold of like a board of advisors, so to speak. That's too formal of a way to say it, but someone that you could reach out to and say, hey, could I connect with you and ask you questions kind of along the way? The third thing we want you to think about on this slide is to ask questions first and seek to understand first. And really, really, really take the time, not just to get to know and understand the software that you have to learn at your new job, or the processes and systems and how to perform your tasks, but also add to your plan that you want to take time every day to get to know your coworkers or your employees and your supervisors' strengths, their personality type, and their values. Because those soft skills are going to help you navigate this first 90 days and beyond and be more effective if you try to understand what their work style is, even just by asking them what their preferred, for example, method of communication is and what their typical schedule is, those types of things. Try to understand if they're more extroverted or introverted and the best way to approach them or report in on your tasks. It's critically important to understand how other people are coming across as well, not just those tangible things. So tip number 3 is to find a mentor as part of this process. And we talked on the previous slide, I just said, about finding someone who is a little bit more seasoned at the organization to help you with advice and kind of help along the way. And that person, or it could be somebody else, could be a possible mentor for you, especially in these first 90 days. So regardless of whether it's that person or someone else, we strongly encourage you all to work towards identifying and finding a mentor. And just by the way, if you're taking a look at this next slide here, we would encourage you to find a mentor in your brand new job, someone within the organization at the beginning. Versus outside of your organization. Because it's a really good idea to have that insight about the culture, the values of the organization, how things work. They can kind of give you the ins and outs. And then later on, as you progress in your career path there, you could identify another person outside of your organization within your industry who can be with you long term. We recommend setting up regular meetings with them. It could be monthly, it could be weekly at the beginning because it's a brand new job. And make sure that you are asking for the right advice and being open to their feedback and leveraging in order to leverage them effectively along the way. Let's do our second poll here if we could, Rebecca. We're curious how many people currently have a mentor. And I think what I want to do is I want to open this one up and say the mentor could be either outside of the organization or inside of the organization. But remember, as you're filling this poll out, for a brand new job, we'd recommend having a mentor inside of the organization first, because that would be most valuable. So we'll give you all a moment to fill this out. And it's totally okay if you don't quite yet. This could be one of the first things that you want to put on your list so that you don't feel like you have to go through this alone, that you don't have any help or guidance. And you do have the support. Okay, great. We actually have good numbers. So I'm happy with 47% of people out there do have a mentor. If your mentor happens to be outside of your organization, that's okay. You can still leverage them for this first 90 days. And then 53% of the people who participated said no. So this could be one of the first things you want to do, especially since in our previous poll in terms of the obstacles, people were saying, I feel like I have to, go through this alone, or, I'm all alone figuring this out. We do know, by the way, that when we're working virtually like this, we can feel more alone just as part of the process, because we're not in an office. We can't walk down to Joe's office and ask him a question. So what we want you to do as much as possible in your first 90 days is fill your calendar with enough of those preliminary meetings to kind of get to know people right away. It could be a coffee chat. It could be talking with them on a lunch break. So a combination, by the way, of work and personal is a really good idea, so that you can establish those connections as you would if you were, water cooler talk, as if you were in the office. Okay. And that will help you feel less alone. And then as part of this, identifying that one person who you can really lean on. But I also identifying like 3 or 4 other people that you really want to stay in touch with so that, again, you don't feel like you're doing this all by yourself and kind of floating out there. Let's talk about tip number 4, and this would be identify where to enhance your skill set. So we talked about the soft skills, if you will, and the understanding what other people's strengths are and their personality type. The other thing we want you to be thinking about in your first 90 days, especially virtually, is what are the things that I need to learn in order to be more effective at this job? And these things could include things that would kind of be relevant regardless of whether you are virtual or in person, but you want to take kind of that virtual spin on this. So for example, if you are not as great at or as comfortable at either participating in or leading meetings virtually, that may be a class you want to check out on lynda.com or LinkedIn Learning, which we think is great. You may need to look at long-term a certification that you need to work towards, whether it's related to virtual work or not. We would recommend when you're checking out coursework and suggested ideas there, ask your boss if they have, participated in any classes that they've found were helpful specifically related to your organization. And if not, we really like these websites that are listed on the website or on the slide here. We also really like to add to that list LinkedIn Learning. It's fantastic. And especially if there are certain areas that you feel less comfortable working remotely, it could be, balancing work and home life. It could be how to create a schedule, when I'm working virtually, etc. Those are things that we want you to include as well. So put those into your plan so that you're clear on what you need to tackle right away. Tip number 5, and this is especially important virtually, so I want to focus on this one for an extra minute because of that and working virtually. So here's the deal with this one. When we are in an office, we naturally are more able, like people can learn about us just by observing us, our body language, our nonverbals, et cetera, and they'll just learn about us just by being in the office. That's a lot easier. But when we have this virtual environment, a lot of that is either taken away or it's just a little bit more formalized because we're just on a screen and that's it. So one of the things that we want you all to be mindful of as a goal is to make sure that you over communicate and communicate with your teammates, your supervisor, etc., more so than you normally would have to in an in-person setting. And we say that because there's kind of a vacuum here since we're not in the office, that you kind of have to fill that gap and provide, for example, a little bit more context about how things are going for you working virtually, where you might need a little bit of help and support working virtually, but also where you're at with a specific project. Why you're working on this specific project or how you're approaching it to get feedback on that. So providing context is it's that much more important in a virtual environment because we don't just naturally create that when we're in person. The second thing we want you to think about with tip number 5, taking a more initiative here, is to really be mindful of when you're on virtual meetings, and maybe you want to attend a couple of virtual meetings that you wouldn't have otherwise, because we want you to observe and think about emulating some of the strengths that key players in your organization might have. And this can help you create a list of soft skills that you may need to adopt or improve upon. It's really helpful to watch how the leaders of your organization or your new organization are handling different situations, because that gives you a sense of culture, kind of what the norms are there so that you can follow those norms. But it also can give you some ideas about how to handle certain things virtually that you may be unsure of. So when you're attending meetings, pay attention to not just what's going on, the content of the meeting, but what's going on outside and around and during the meeting, and how are people handling different kind of even touchy situations. And then finally, in the first 90 days of your new job, especially virtually, it's a great idea, again, as part of over communicating, make sure that you raise your hand to volunteer your time to help someone out, to answer a question for someone or provide advice or provide support. That can help you establish those relationships a little bit more with more people. in a more formalized, faster way. And so taking initiative to establish these relationships with people is something that's that much more important, is going to take more time and initiative on your part because you're in this virtual environment. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more in just a few minutes. Tip number 6 is to be confident. So here's the deal. We know that when you start a new job, it's very easy to feel intimidated, like you're, still learning the ropes, and it's hard to feel completely confident. Like we said earlier, you want to feel like you're proving yourself and your value. So one of the things we want you to think about as well is do something every single day to take care of yourself, not just diving into your brand new job all the time, and making sure that you're practicing self-care and life balance as well. But also do certain things to help improve your confidence or build your confidence over time too. So if you take a look at this next slide here, we all know that our attitude is critical to the outcome of our actions. Our attitude affects our actions, which in turn affects your outcome, right? Most of our clients will tell us when they start coaching with us that they are their biggest obstacle getting in their way. It's not something external or outside of them. It's something inside of themselves. So it's really important for you in this first 90 days, especially, to make a list of the areas where you tend to feel less confident. Is it talking to this type of or certain person, like a leader within your organization, that makes you a little bit more nervous? Is it discussing or working on a certain type of project that makes you more nervous? And make sure that you've got more support around those areas and more of a solid action plan for how you're going to work around those obstacles, okay? And the other thing at the very bottom of the slide that we want to bring up too is to keep in mind that confidence is a muscle and you have to work it out. It's not something that you either have or you don't have. You got to take it to the gym, so to speak, and continue to develop it and grow it, so to speak. So there's a couple things on the slide here, and then one more I'll add to this. If you're the type of person that's got a lot of negative self-talk and some doubt going on, you may want to develop some affirmations for yourself that you post on your bathroom mirror, on your refrigerator at home. You want to make sure that when you're on screen, especially, that you're watching your body language. And what we have told our clients, and I'll do this right now, is even when you just sit up straight when you're at home on a meeting, etc., that can help you feel more confident. So that's another thing. Your body language and your posture is a big deal for your confidence too. And the last thing that we recommend to our clients to help boost and work out their confidence or build that muscle is to make sure that you're challenging yourself on a regular basis and trying something new or taking small risks every single day so that you're building that muscle. They don't have to be huge risks. We don't want you to get fired, but they could be small things like, hey, I want to reach out to talk with this person who I feel a little bit nervous to talk about, but I'm going to push myself to do it. That will help boost your confidence. All right, let's talk about tip number 7. And this is to be a leader, and be a leader right away, even if you are not in a formalized leadership position at your organization. We also want you to think about, as we spoke about earlier, these soft skills. We want you to be mindful of learning how to motivate other people on your team. This is really important. Working virtually, we can get burned out. We can get less motivated and kind of even bored sometimes because we don't have that engagement that we had about, when we're in the office. So it's critically important to find ways to motivate yourself. Could be playlists of music when, at the end of the day, 3 o'clock tends to be my witching hour where I start to lose my energy a little bit. So it could be a playlist. You want to make sure that your office space is inviting and warm and inspiring to you. So you want to do that for yourself, but you also want to focus on, hey, how can I be a cheerleader for other people as well? Because they'll give back to you, and doing that for them will help kind of motivate you and keep you engaged as well. You want to learn over time how to handle conflict effectively. And actually, what I would say about this point on this slide here as well is it's not just about handling conflict, but it's also about being empathetic with everyone else that's going through the same thing you are, that everyone else is trying to work remotely and virtually as well, and being patient with them. Asking them, how are they doing? Asking them if you can support them in any way. Like asking these types of questions is not just more appropriate these days because we're all under a certain element of stress with this, but also it will help you understand the other person and how you can support them effectively and vice versa. And try to be more patient with others and give them a little bit of leeway because, as we said earlier at the beginning, some people are more effective and do a better job working remotely than others. For those extroverts out there, or people who, for example, who are less structured, when they're thrown into this virtual environment, they're missing all of that interaction and it can impact their energy level. So you want to think about that as well. And the last two, in terms of being a leader and working towards that more, is to work on developing your emotional intelligence. And we've talked about that all along the way today, understanding other people, empathy, etc. And then finally, and I wanted to touch on this last one just a little bit more too, make sure that you communicate your own strengths and your needs as well. I think that when we're in the first 90 days of a new job, understandably, we don't want to show any like weaknesses because we're afraid that will look like, oh, they'll think they hired the wrong person. And that's not what I'm talking about here. I want you to be proactive about letting your supervisor and your team know where you can pitch in and help and what your strengths are. But also the things where you need advice or assistance. So can I ask you a question, or can I ask for support here? Can I ask for a little bit of extra attention here? That doesn't mean that you don't know how to do your job. It's asking for what you need, especially in this virtual environment, is critically important. I did want to say one other thing here about this one, and then we'll continue on. I wanted to give a quick example about communicating, not just about your strengths and needs, but also about your personality type too. You want to let people know how you tend to operate and how you tend to come across. The example is a client. She was actually here in Atlanta, and she was starting a brand new job, and she realized that there were certain things she wanted to let her new supervisor know about how she kind of operated and what her personality type was, because in her previous position, she was the type of person that is just cool as a cucumber, even under a lot of pressure and when everyone else is running around frantically. And people in her previous job started to assume that she didn't care about deadlines, or she just, didn't get that worked up about things. And it was less about her personality type and more so about she didn't have a sense of urgency, when that was exactly not the case. She was just cool under pressure. So she made a point to proactively communicate that strength of hers and that element of her personality so that people weren't making assumptions about who she was in this brand new job. So your first 90 days is your opportunity to not just get to know other people, but to educate them about what your needs are, what your strengths are, how you work most effectively, so that in this virtual environment, even more so, you can get those needs met. Let's do this next slide here. And then I do see we've got a couple of questions, so we can pause here for just a moment. When you're thinking about your leadership strengths, everyone, and if you're wanting to know what are the leadership strengths I should be developing and where could I use a little bit of beefing up or enhancement, this is a great leadership wheel. This is from actually Development Dimensions International. And these are the top 10 leadership skills. They are most important in today's economy. You can rank yourself on each of these areas. You could even ask a former coworker, friend, or family member to rank you so that you get that, objective opinion from them as well. And then identify, for example, 2 or 3 areas of development that you really want to focus on the most in your first 90 days. This can help kind of make your plan more strategic. So Rebecca, I was going to go ahead and answer some of these if that's okay with you, because I've got this pulled up.
Yeah, no problem. No
Okay.
problem. Would you like for me to ask you the questions, or would you like to just kind of go ahead and read them?
I'm okay and go ahead and to do it if you're good with that.
That's fine. Yes.
Yeah, cool. I'm getting better at this Zoom thing after over a year, you would think by now, right? So thank you all for these questions. So we've got one here that is, what are personality types? How do you recognize the different types? This is a great question. So a lot of you maybe have heard about Myers-Briggs and different personality types. There's lots of different kind of, what am I trying to say? Not criteria of personality types, but different ways to like assess them. So there's introvert, extrovert, there's people that are more of a leader versus people who are more of a follower. There is strategic kind of big picture thinking, and there's people who are more detail oriented. I think what I would do is with this particular one, because this could be a whole nother topic, is if you took like a strengths finder assessment, for example, that can help give you a sense of personality types. And I've actually seen a few like free kind of short and sweet Myers-Briggs personality types. And if you participate in one of those and kind of take one of those assessments online, it will give you a sense of what your personality type is, but it'll show you what the other ones are too. So you can get a sense of what some of those categories are. Great question. Another question is, how do you gain an official mentor? How do you ask someone to be your mentor, and what should you expect? So great question. Some organizations will actually provide a mentor or even have a mentorship program, and you just may not know about it. So I would ask your HR department if there is one, just in case. And then this is one of the ways, just by the way, that you could leverage your alumni association to look for a mentor within your new industry and just see if someone is out there that is willing to do that. And Rebecca can speak to this a little bit more later if needed to. But if there's someone within your organization that you'd like to be a mentor to you, I would simply say, look, I'm new here. This is my first 90 days. I was wondering if I could ask for your advice a little bit and kind of lean on you a little bit along the way, whether it's a formal mentoring relationship or just an informal, some informal conversations that we have sometime. Would that be possible or feasible for you? And I would probably run this idea of asking for a mentor by your supervisor first before you did anything, just to find out, what they thought about it, if they have any ideas or suggestions, and they might even be able to steer you in the right direction of someone who could be a possibility. Or they might say, hey, let's wait on that. I'll help you out, along the way, and then maybe we can talk about that later on. Next question, is it best to have a mentor outside the team or division you are new to? I think it's going to depend on what your team is like and what your supervisor is like. If your supervisor is already kind of acting as a mentor or will do so, then find someone outside of your team. But if they're not, I would suggest better to have someone inside. Couple other questions. What do you do if the environment is toxic? Being really direct with you, if the environment is toxic, I would not want to stay there. And I'm sorry to say this, but I would consider whether it's the right place for you to be in the long run. And if it is toxic, if there's something you can talk about with your boss, or if you can go to HR to talk with them about it, those would be my two best advice if it's a place that you feel you need to stay, at least for the short term. And that's a big question. Two things related to that is, if anyone would like to ask, more questions when we're done today, but also if you'd like a copy of the presentation, the email address is down here at the bottom of this slide. It's admin@hollycrawford.com. I'll put that in the chat box in a minute. So yes, we can give you that. And also, if anyone would like to schedule a free quick call with me to get additional advice, like the work environment toxic is a big question, happy to give you some additional advice and chat with you about that. We also talk with you about our coaching services during that time. Do I use the Strengths Finder 2.0 assessment all the time? I really like that one a lot. I think it's very kind of easy to understand and comprehend. You don't have to have someone help you interpret the results. And if you just do the basic top 5 strengths, I really don't think you have to do your top 30. I tend to find that's kind of overwhelming. The basic top 5 strengths is plenty, and you'll get a lot of good information about your strengths, but also action items for how to leverage them. So great questions. Thank you for answering those, and for saying thank you for answering the questions too. All right, so let's talk about tip number 8. And as a reminder, we will do Q&A at the end today as well. So please feel free to put your questions in here. I love having those. One of the things, tip number 8, one of the things people tend to kind of forget, understandably, is that you want to be proactive about asking for feedback along the way, and especially in your first 90 days. So here's the deal: we're all very busy, especially working remotely. And your supervisor may or may not be the type of person that either has the time or is thinking about like providing you with constructive feedback as you're progressing in your brand new job. So it's really important, no matter what, for you to take the approach, if you will, of asking for feedback along the way, more so than you would otherwise, maybe in the long run, because you want to make sure that you're on the right track. So on a regular basis, when you're talking with your team, with a coworker, with your supervisor, make sure you just kind of tack on at the end, like, does that make sense? Am I on the right track? Do you have any feedback or input for me? Just make sure that you start to put that out there a little bit more. It will help you establish those relationships with people in a stronger way. But also it will give you that constructive feedback that we all need to understand, like, hey, am I doing things correctly and properly? And obviously, when we get that feedback, we want to be open-minded about it. And what I like about people asking proactively for the feedback is that you're letting people know not just that you're open to it, but you care about your professional growth. And that you're interested in being successful, and you don't want to dismiss what they say, blame them, or criticize them. Obviously, that's the incorrect response. What you want to do when you get that feedback, including if it's unsolicited, is try your best to accept it. You can filter out what's true and what's not true, of course, but accept what is true, and the nuggets that you can take that would be productive and helpful. Implement changes along the way, and work towards improving your performance or just how you approach something, if that's the feedback that you got. So that's tip number 8, is ask for and implement this constructive criticism or feedback. Tip number 9 is to establish effective relationships with all of your coworkers. Now, and your supervisor, by the way, and employees if you have them. So let's talk about this one in a little bit greater depth for a moment, because we started talking about this at the beginning. And this is the type of thing that kind of takes a hit when we're working virtually. We haven't seen, or we're not seeing people in person. And while I think we can establish rapport with people virtually, it's a little bit harder and a little bit different. So we want to be mindful about establishing relationships, especially with those key players, being more mindful about it and more proactive about it. So all of those key people that you're going to need to be working with on a consistent, regular basis, I want you to schedule a formal work meeting with them to get to know like what their role is in your projects and vice versa, what their work style is, what their schedule is like, all of that. But also, I would almost like take them to lunch too, or take them to coffee and have a virtual coffee chat that's less formal and maybe a little bit more personal, even if it's just for 15 to 20 minutes. And you can talk about work stuff a little bit then also, but try to establish and create that kind of sense of that water cooler talk. And I know that a lot of organizations out there are using like software and platforms like Slack, etc., for water cooler talk and people to hang out and talk about personal things. Cool for you to use that. That's totally fine and great. But make sure that you're really careful about what you ask and what you share there in your first 90 days, just because you want to be mindful of your brand. And since you haven't established a rapport or relationship there, you just want to be mindful of that. Let's look at the slide here for a second before we move to our last tip, and then we'll get to Q&A here in just a moment. We already talked about communicating your strengths, talked about asking for what you need. 2 of the other things, or I should say 3 actually, you want to think about and establish really good kind of ground rules for your working relationships with each person on your team that you're going to be needing to work with, especially virtually, because again, we can't pop down to their office. Ask them, do they prefer email or do they prefer hopping on the phone? Do they want to do a video chat when a particular issue or something comes up? Like, ask them how they work effectively, and tell them how you most work effectively or work most effectively as well. Second, you want to make sure that you're managing up and doing the same thing with your supervisor. How do you prefer I check in with you? Is it weekly? Is it daily? Do you want an email? Do you want something else? What is the best kind of cadence for our in-person one-on-one meetings, I should say? And do you want me to create the agenda, or will you be creating the agenda? And the third thing we want you to think about is these online platforms. I mentioned Slack before, but even LinkedIn, it's a really good idea to start getting connected with the people that you work with on LinkedIn. And that's a way to kind of, I don't want to say hang out with them necessarily, but get involved with them and establish rapport a little bit more. Connect with those new coworkers, learn about, what their background is by reading their LinkedIn profile. Where did they go to school? It could be a good talking point. It gives you some possible things that you could find ways to connect on. So leveraging LinkedIn during this time, especially when you're trying to get your sea legs and establish those relationships, because you don't have the in-person option, leveraging LinkedIn is a great way to do this too. So our final and last poll for today is how many people out there are currently active on LinkedIn and have either used it for these purposes or just in general, like I'm active on it, I'm checking it regularly, I learn from other people from it, I'm posting, etc. So we'll pull up this last poll here for just a moment. And we like LinkedIn too, as you all are filling this out. We like LinkedIn also as like, for example, joining a new or a LinkedIn group specific to your industry could be a good way to meet new people within your industry or within your organization. But by the way, too, that could be a place that you could identify a possible mentor as well. Oh, good. So 72% have said yes. That's awesome. I love it. These numbers keep going up over the years, which is great. 28% said no. So fantastic that you're leveraging LinkedIn, everyone. Please use it specifically for the first 90 days to establish that rapport and relationship with your new coworkers too. And finally, tip number 10, and then we've actually got a couple of quick additional action items that we want you to write down and start to think about the action items that you want to take 2 things in the next week here. Create a plan for your first 90 days, even if it's short and sweet on 1 page. Doesn't have to be complicated and long, but you want to include things like how to address your obstacles, how to find a mentor, classes and training. And if it's appropriate to do so, it could be a good idea to share your plan with your supervisor, your manager, and say, hey, this is what I'm thinking of doing in the first 90 days. Am I on the right track? I would welcome your feedback. That's tip number 10. We talked about connecting virtually already a little bit. Here are a couple of quick additional items as we're working on our action items and then moving towards Q&A. Go ahead and get out your pen and paper so you can write down your action items. Check in with people, whether it's informally or scheduling a call with a new coworker. Pick up the phone, make a commitment to talk with them on video, like to be on video on a more regular basis in the first 90 days so you can establish that rapport and connection. Check out what's in their background and make a comment on it, because the cool thing about working virtually is we have a window into people's personal lives. We can connect with them on different things personally as well. If you're a new manager, for example, or even just new to your team and you think it would be a great idea to have either a weekly or monthly coffee break, suggest that, put that out there so that you can get to know people. But if you feel like your team needs a little bit more cohesiveness, that could help with that too. It can be short and sweet. It could be 20 to 30 minutes, not that long. But again, it's replacing the, hey, I'm going to run into you in the, in the lunchroom if I was in person. And then in terms of meeting ideas, you can kind of mix it up and do some fun things on some of your meetings, like do a scavenger hunt in their house, wear something fun, have themed meetings, etc. Encourage coworkers or your employees to send in photos of trips they've taken, etc. There's just different ways that you can get to know people personally that, again, virtually, it's a little bit different. And we already talked about making sure that your home office is set up for success for you, that it makes you happy. You've got all the tools you need. You have music. Some people like to have the TV on in the background. That helps keep their mind engaged or make them feel kind of less alone and isolated. So there's lots of things that you can do there. And we also want you to think about creating that schedule and routine for yourself, because when you're in a brand new job, especially when you're not in the office, you need to figure out, okay, here are my working hours. What am I doing during the course of the day? And blocking your time for certain projects, types of tasks during the day, and also during the week. So for example, for me, we have our coaches do client calls on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, because those bookend days are for admin, marketing, financial work, okay, kind of business work, if you will. And that self-care, working remotely, and this is our final thought, and this is to just make sure that you're really taking care of yourself effectively, especially in a new job. We can get a little bit more anxious and uptight. Are we performing effectively? And it's critically important to make sure that you exercise, that you get time outside, that you get the support you need from friends and family, that you take breaks and you're not overworking either. We know that you want to prove yourself, and we get that. But if you get too burned out, you're not going to work effectively at the end of the day. All right, so let's go ahead and do any final questions that we have. And I know we've got some comments in the chat box too. And so if there's anything we need to do there. Oh, and lynda.com. Yes, I'm sorry about that. The lynda.com LinkedIn Learning is what was supposed to be in there. So I apologize for that error on the suggested coursework. The one that we primarily suggest is LinkedIn Learning. But when we're talking about coursework, just by the way, don't forget that industry-specific associations could have some really good online classes that you could participate in too. And what's nice about them is obviously they're usually tailored to people in your industry. So thank you for catching that for us. All right, so everyone, please go ahead and write down your action steps that you will take. We've got some suggested items here. It could be working on finding a mentor, class to take the leadership wheel assessment. As a quick reminder, if you'd like a copy of the PowerPoint, just email us at admin@hollycrawford.com. We're happy to do that strategy session with you. And please know too, as we start to close out for today as well, we don't expect people to find a mentor just like that. Like, it's not an overnight thing necessarily. That may be something that you bookmark in your head for your first 90 days to kind of work towards, but it could be something that you say, okay, look, I'm gonna, work on this and try to identify someone, but I'll ask them after, my first 90 days and I've gotten to know them a little bit better. So a mentor is a good thing to have, but it's also not something that we expect you to have, like right away. That can take a little bit more time, and that's acceptable and reasonable. Okay, Rebecca, do we have any other questions that you are seeing that I am not?
Yeah. Well, I was curious, do you have any suggestions for formatting of the accomplishments document that you mentioned earlier?
Yes. So an accomplishments document is something that's really, really good to keep handy for yourself on like your desktop of your work computer. Because one of the things as you're starting to create your plan for your first 90 days and what you need to focus on is you also want to keep track of those accomplishments and things that, you're checking off the list and making happen. The reason why we want you to do that, and I'll talk about the formatting too, is number one, it will help boost your confidence. Number two, when you have a performance review after your first 90 days or, give or take, you'll have that content and material ready. And it's a really good idea to keep that accomplishments document because again, it's going to make you feel like, oh, I am making progress, not behind the 8 ball all the time. It's a great idea to keep that that document kind of separated into things like tasks or projects completed, and then a separate section of testimonials and kudos that you've gotten either from coworkers or your supervisor, because that also can help boost your confidence and make you feel like you're making progress too. Great question. Thanks, Rebecca.
Great. All great advice. Well, I don't see any more questions in the Q&A or the chat.
Okay, good. I think that's a good thing. That means
it's kind of good. So thank you so much, Haley, for your time and energy and for all the great advice you provided today. Thank you everyone for participating in today's webinar. You'll receive a recording of today's webinar as well as a survey for your feedback within about the next 2 to 3 business days. I'll try to get that as soon get it out as soon as possible. And yes, there's also, I dropped the Qualtrics survey form also in chat, so you may see that as well. Thank you so much and have a wonderful day.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Be safe.